Chief Justice Warren Burger once wrote, "The obligation of our profession is to serve as healers of human conflict." Welcome to Lawyers as Healers, a podcast exploring an evolution happening inside the American legal profession. I am your host, Dave Albrechta. I am a coach, a mediator, and a recovering litigator. In this podcast, I'll explore how and why an increasing number of lawyers are moving beyond adversarial thinking to return to the obligation of our profession, which is to serve as healers of human conflict. Hello, and welcome back to Lawyers as Healers. Thanks again for joining me. In the last episode, I shared my personal story about stepping away from litigation, and in this episode, I'd like to talk some more about what I was stepping into and what there was to step into. I didn't leave litigation and leave my traditional practice of law to go into something else. I didn't have some idea about what was next. I left because I just couldn't keep doing it anymore. And so next came this really big question of what am I doing? What's next? And so this took a few different directions and is still evolving. It's been 3 years, but it's still unfolding. And I began, I like I said in the last episode, I did a lot of research, and as we're trained to do, and I found about 13 or 14 articles pretty quickly. They all had lawyers as healers in the title of the article. I couldn't believe that those two words were even in the same sentence. It was hard for me to comprehend at the time. But when I had gotten this message that I needed to set up a more healing type space, I began searching for that idea, lawyers as healers, and I found way more than I thought I would. And it's funny looking back at these articles, I found a lot of them have a question mark at the end of it, whether it's actually written or implied. Can lawyers be healers? There's one that's just lawyers as healers, question mark. And so it's a lot of people just posing the question, is this possible? And is this what we're really supposed to be doing as lawyers? So I was fascinated by all of that. As I was looking into that, there's a number of movements that have sprouted up over the years, and one that's still very active, which is integrative law, and led by Kim Wright. And she wrote a book called Lawyers as Peacemakers, which was published by the ABA. And I found that early on and read that, and it's a really great book in terms of, again, not only acknowledging the experience I was going through and kind of normalizing that for me, but also laying out some really clear roadmaps of what do you do when you have these realizations, and how do you set up a practice that is focused on people, making a human-centered practice, a heart-centered practice, and how do you build that, and what do you do? And so I read that book and was fascinated by it and began brainstorming about how I could do this and how I could transition our firm into this kind of a practice. And I ended up reaching out to Kim, and I hired her as a coach. She refers to herself as a conscious lawyering coach, which I really appreciated. And again, all of these things, every time I found something new, I just couldn't even believe that existed. I couldn't believe that was a thing, a conscious lawyering coach. And so Eleni and I worked with her for 6 months on building this new practice. And ultimately, we launched an integrative law practice. And so I've been experimenting with that for the last 3 years and figuring out how I can make that work while also not litigating. And it became also pretty clear as I was doing this that I needed a new skill set. I was trained and good at participating in the traditional system and sending demand letters and having these these formal processes and talking with opposing counsel and arguing about the law and the facts. but I wasn't trained at all in how to interact with clients in this new way. And so I began looking for trainings, and I began with mediation. So in 2024, I spent that whole year really focused on mediation trainings. And I did my first one with the Colorado Bar Association. That was a remote training. And I expected it to be fairly traditional, but I was surprised when almost right away they began talking to us about how you mediate with two parties, the two people in conflict in the same room. So they're sitting across the table from each other and having a conversation, and you're mediating that conversation. And I couldn't believe this. It took me that whole training to even comprehend that this was a possibility. I knew that this sometimes happened in family law, which made sense to me when you have parents and maybe kids, custody issues. But I could not wrap my head around the concept of two parties sitting in a room together having a conversation, which just gives you a sense of how different we're trained and how different the system approaches conflict between parties. And it took me that whole training and some kind of integration time after that to really begin to accept that this was possible. And in that training, I began to see that. And I was extremely skeptical, but I began to see that there was really something to this approach. There was really something to be said about having two people that are in the conflict sit down and have a discussion. And just to real quick, just to give listeners a sense of this, in the practice I had and in employment law and federal practice in Colorado at the time, you don't let parties talk to each other. Nobody's interested in that. The lawyers do not want the parties to talk because we believe there's too much risk. The parties are going to say something that they're going to ruin the case. They're going to create more evidence. There's a whole laundry list of things that we worry about as lawyers. And oftentimes we advise clients to not talk to each other. They're allowed to talk to one another if they want to, but we often advise them not to. If there's mediation in a case like that, we go into separate rooms. A lot of times now after COVID, we're remote. We never see the other side. Every once in a while, the lawyers will talk. So a mediator might pull the lawyers out of the rooms and say, "Hey, well, I need you guys to talk about this and explain to me what's going on," and have a conversation. But never the parties. I maybe had one or two times at the end of a case where parties wanted to shake hands or see each other, but that was really rare. And a lot of times we'd spend a lot of time even working with the other side prior to a mediation to make sure the parties didn't even run into each other in the hallway when they got there, and coordinating when people arrived. I mean, we just don't put people in the same room. So that just gives you a flavor, I think, of how shocking this was to me. So I finished that training and began to see this different way. And then I took a second training, which was here in Durango, and it was much different, a much broader perspective. It was put on by a former pastor who had gotten into conflict resolution and was doing trainings. So there was not much of a legal background, and it was closer to what we call transformative mediation, which is really more about helping the parties transform and understand and change their relationship with the conflict, less about the outcome. And that was transformative for me too. And by that time, luckily, I'd opened up to this idea that parties could and maybe even should be talking directly to each other when they're in conflict. And so that was a really, really great experience. And then I did my final training with the Center for Understanding Conflict. And that model really combined the two that I had just done. The CBA was really focused on outcomes still, really focused on settling cases, but with parties in the same room. The transformative was not. This was a mix of those two, where there was focus on an outcome and a process, and how do we get parties to a place of solution and understanding, but also really focused on that understanding piece. How do we help parties understand where the other person's coming from, and help them communicate and do it in a way that's compassionate and empathetic. And so that was a really big year for me in terms of seeing that there's this whole other way of helping parties deal with conflict than what most lawyers are even aware of, and certainly not what we're trained in. And so I left that year feeling like I'd gained some skills. I learned a lot about reflective listening and how to hold space for people, how to begin turning down my analytical mind that wants to advise and problem solve and tell people what to do, which took a lot of work and reprogramming. I'm still working on that. But it began helping me see this new way of being with clients. So as that's happening, I'm still getting calls from clients and working with people and realizing that the mediation skills are great, and a lot of them you can use in a one-on-one setting. But I noticed this pattern that people experience when they're in conflict, particularly if they get into litigation. And that pattern is that it forces us or causes us to continually look at the past. And lawyers encourage clients to do this. We ask people to collect evidence and go find the documents, go find the emails, go find the text messages, dig up all this stuff, save everything, all of which is important if you're going to litigate. But it causes clients to have to continually go back and revisit this traumatic thing that happened to them. So in my area, let's say someone was sexually harassed at work and then fired for reporting it. It's an extremely traumatic event. And when we litigate a case for 2, 3, 4 years, sometimes more, that client is forced to go back and relive those experiences over and over and over and over again. They have to actually go back into that space. When we're being trained on how to get really good direct examination from someone, you're trained to really help bring them back into that moment. Maybe by the time they're on the stand at trial, it's been 2 or 3 years since the event happened. You have to drop them back into that space so that the jury can really feel like they're there. Explain the room. What was on the walls? What was the feeling? Can you explain who was there and what their emotions were like and what were your reactions? I mean, you're really dropping them into that space. And we are training our clients that whole time to do that. And you do the same thing when we're prepping them for depositions. And every moment we have with them, we're trying to get them ready for that moment where they have to sell the bad thing that happened to them. And this causes all of these neural pathways to form and become pretty deep ruts because they have to keep going back and reliving this horrible thing that happened to them. And this is why we talk about the system causing trauma. It escalates and inflates the trauma that they already experienced. And lawyers don't think about what that impact is on people. And so as I was working with people and I was seeing that pattern and I was seeing my role in that over the years, and I didn't want to keep doing that, I began seeing that the communication skills you learn as a mediator are very helpful for people who are in conflict. But there's still something missing in terms of how I wanted to interact with clients on a one-on-one basis. If the other party isn't in the room, let's say someone comes in and they've got a problem, they've got a conflict. I'll stay with my area. Someone got fired and they believe it was wrongful. And they're telling me, I really don't want to litigate. I don't want to go to court. I don't want to make a big deal out of this. I really want to focus on getting a new job. I don't want me going after them to impact my ability to find a new position, which is always a big concern. And so they like to reach out to the other party. So we do. The other party says no, they don't want to talk. There's no mediation, there's no resolution. And so I present to the client that the only option is you go find a lawyer to sue them, or you have to kind of move on and decide where you want to put your energy. Do you want to put it into going after these other people and trying to get some compensation, or do you want to put your energy into rebuilding your career and job search and all the things that come next? And so I was having a lot of those conversations with people. And for me, I was finding that I was very attracted to that space. I really wanted to help people heal internally. That is by shifting their focus. So instead of spending the next 3 years and having watched so many clients do this, and seeing how detrimental that is on people and how damaging it is to their mental health, particularly of reliving this case over and over again. I really wanted to help people shift their focus to, all right, what can I do next? What's next for me? A lot of times in these employment cases, by the end of the case, people would be really happy that they got fired. They may not be happy about how it happened, but a lot of times they would begin to see the silver lining and say, man, I was so unhappy there and I didn't like the work and they treated me horribly. And thank God they fired me because I never would have left on my own. And I'm so much happier now. And they have to go through a really difficult period usually before they land on their feet. But after they do and they've got a new job and things are moving on, they're in a really good place. And I saw that happen many times, and a lot of people that happened to would still be in litigation and start wondering, why am I still dealing with these people? Life has gotten much better. I'm in a job I like. Things are going well. I don't want to be thinking about these people every day. I don't want to have to go see their lawyer. I don't want to have to get emails from you about what they just said and how they're calling me a liar, and I just want this out of my life. And so I began noticing that pattern, and really, like I said, wanted to begin helping people shift their focus to that new thing, because I had seen that once they get through that tough period, oftentimes life improves drastically. And it was painful to watch people be in that dark space of, I don't know what's next. I'm scared. I don't have a job. I don't know if I'm going to find one. It was a scary place to be. And the law feeds off of that moment. They want to be doing something. They want to be actively doing something. And there's some revenge feelings. There's some anger and frustration. And so that kind of creates this perfect cocktail of, let's sue them, because then I'm taking action, I'm doing something, I might get compensated, and I'm really angry, and it's a nice outlet for that. But inevitably, that period of time ends and new things emerge, and their life is moving forward, yet they're still stuck in this thing that they've created where they have to keep reliving the bad thing that happened to them and staying in that space. And they're done with it. They want to move on, but the legal process is slow. So, anyways, all of that is to say, I began exploring this idea of coaching, because I wanted to help people in that space. And that's really everything I just explained is what coaching does. It helps you shift your focus away from the things that are getting in your way of doing things that you'd like to be doing, or getting in the way of just being the person you want to be in the world. And so I really liked this concept of being able to, rather than be a professional who helps people look to the past and relive trauma, be a professional who helps people shift away from the thing that was negative or that's preventing them from moving forward, and look forward and think about what's next and how do we build what's next and put our energy into productive things like rebuilding a career, rebuilding a life, rather than looking for external sources, validation, vindication from others, and forcing them, coercing them to pay you, and shifting instead to, how can I productively build something new? So I was and I still am very attractive to this approach to conflict. And I really have begun to believe that all three of these things create a really nice ecosystem for people looking for help from lawyers. And by that, I mean there's this nice combination of facilitative mediation, which is having parties in the same room and finding facilitative mediators to have those discussions, hopefully to find a resolution that both parties can be a part of creating early. If that doesn't work, coaching is a really great thing to look at next, even if people are still going to litigate. What I've found is that people are in the legal system who are being coached at the same time become more stable. They're more grounded. They are not just dwelling in the past. And coaching provides this balance where if you're litigating and you're having to go back and relive all of this stuff, you're also dedicating a part of your time and energy to looking forward and thinking about how am I going to rebuild and what do I need to be focusing on so that I don't slip into that space where because I have to every once in a while go back and relive this, I start reliving it all the time. When I'm sitting on the couch, when I'm supposed to be relaxing, when I'm trying to go to sleep, when I'm with my kids, coaching helps you keep that limited to just the times where it needs to happen within litigation and helps you shift away from that in all of your other spaces. And so I found it to just be a really nice complement either to litigation or if someone says, I don't want to do that, this is a really nice next step for people to think about and focus on. So I've blended all of those together, and that to me really is what an integrative practice looks like in terms of allowing clients to have options. There isn't just one option. I'm going to sue them or I'm not. This creates a menu of options for people to choose from and choose what fits best for them in their life at that moment. What I've learned from this process and where I'm at now is that there is not just one way to practice law. And I want that to be really clear on two fronts. For lawyers, I want lawyers to hear that. There is not just one way to practice law. There are many tools at our disposal. And like I thought, it is not true that bringing in other tools is us getting outside of our lane. It's okay to bring in other tools and skills to benefit our clients. The other perspective is from the client's perspective. I want people who are users of the legal system and need it to understand that there are other lawyers out there doing things differently. And I always recommend it as a lawyer that people get second opinions. And I also think people should seek out lawyers who have integrative practices, who are facilitative mediators, who have this background of thinking differently. And doesn't mean you shouldn't also get an opinion from someone who just is a trial lawyer. That's helpful too. I really want people to know that there are different approaches and that there is a growing movement of lawyers out there who are trying to do things differently. So, just want to end on that note and be clear to lawyers and potential clients. There is a different way to do this, and they're effective ways, and they are human-centered ways, and they are fulfilling ways of showing up for people and actually helping. And as my title suggests, lawyers are and can be and ought to be focused on being healers of human conflict. As I've been noting in earlier episodes, I've begun having interviews. I've had some really great conversations so far, and I'm really excited to start sharing those conversations, which are coming soon. So we'll have one more episode of this kind of introductory series of episodes, and then we're going to get into conversations with practitioners who are out there doing this work and leaders of this movement and people that have been doing it a lot longer than me and know a lot more than I do about all of this. So thanks so much for being here. Thanks for listening. Until next time, take care of yourself, be well, and we'll talk soon.